Amara had been planning the evening for weeks. It was her 8th wedding anniversary, and she wanted everything to look perfect. The big hall and across shimmered with soft candlelight, golden drapes, and flowers carefully arranged at every corner. The scent of jollof rice, grilled tilapia, and spicy kebabs floated through the air, making guests smile even before the food reached their plates. A live band played high-life music in the background, their rhythms blending with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Friends, relatives, and colleagues of both Amara and her husband Kwame filled the room, dressed in their finest clothes, ready to celebrate love and commitment. To the guests, the night sparkled with happiness. Everyone expected romance, warm speeches, and the kind of joy that comes with years of marriage. Amara moved gracefully from table to table, greeting people, making sure they felt welcome. She wore a deep emerald dress that caught the light every time she turned, her smile practiced yet warm enough to hide the nerves tugging at her chest. Kwame stood proudly at her side, laughing loudly, shaking hands, his charm filling the room. But beneath the polished surface, something uneasy lingered. Amara felt it in the way Kwame's laughter sometimes cut too sharp, or the way his eyes narrowed when she lingered too long with certain guests. She brushed it off, determined not to spoil the night. On the outside, it was the picture of a perfect marriage celebration. Inside, a quiet tension waited, unspoken but heavy, like a storm cloud behind the bright glow of the candles. The dinner was in full swing, the music soft in the background, and plates filled with food as people laughed and shared stories. Amara had just served another round of drinks when a small disagreement began at the table. It was nothing serious, just a passing comment about the food that Kwame twisted into something bigger. His voice rose louder than it needed to, sharp enough to turn a few heads. Amara, trying to keep the peace, responded quietly, almost in a whisper, asking him to lower his voice. And then it happened. Without warning, Kwame's hand flew across the table and struck Amara across the face. The sound of the slap cracked through the room like broken glass. Everything stopped. Forks froze midair. Glasses trembled in people's hands. The music, though still playing, suddenly felt far away. Gasps filled the air as every eye turned toward the couple. Amara stood frozen, her cheek burning, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but she stayed rooted to the spot. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let a tear fall in front of them. The silence grew heavy, uncomfortable, almost suffocating. And then, to make it worse, Kwame laughed. He leaned back in his chair, waving his hand like it was nothing, saying, "Ah, don't mind her. This is just discipline." His tone was mocking, careless, as if the violence was a joke meant for everyone's amusement. The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do. Some avoided looking directly at Amara, others whispered under their breath. A few relatives coughed nervously, pretending to focus on their food. No one dared to challenge Kwame, not in that moment, not in front of his booming laugh and confident posture. The man who had once charmed them now revealed something ugly, but fear and shame kept everyone quiet. Amara, still standing there, felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. Her fingers twitched as if to reach for her cheek, but she held them down, forcing her body into stillness. Inside, a storm was raging. Humiliation, anger, and heartbreak swirled together, but she swallowed it all, pressing it deep into her chest. Her silence was not weakness, it was survival. Kwame poured himself another drink and raised his glass, as if nothing had happened. The chatter in the room stumbled back into motion, broken and uneasy, like a song played offbeat. People forced laughter, clinking glasses, but the memory of that slap lingered in the air, impossible to erase. Amara smiled faintly, her lips tight, her eyes distant. She sat back down, straightening her dress with careful hands, pretending to continue the celebration. But inside, she was already shifting. Something had snapped, something that would never return to the way it was. Her silence was not surrender, it was the birth of resolve. And though no one could see it that night, the storm within her had already begun to gather strength. As Amara sat at the table, pretending to smile after the slap, her mind drifted back to the years she had spent with Kwame. The humiliation in front of everyone was painful, but it wasn't new. It was only the first time the world had seen what she had been living with in silence. For 8 long years, she had endured his sharp words, his constant criticism, and the way he always found a way to make her feel small. She remembered their early days, when he had charmed her with sweet promises. He told her she was beautiful, intelligent, and strong, and she believed him. But slowly, the compliments turned into cutting remarks. "You talk too much. You don't know how to dress. No one would want you if it wasn't for me." At first, she laughed them off, convincing herself he was joking. But over time, those words carved deep wounds in her heart. Kwame controlled everything, what she wore, where she went, even who she spoke to. If she stayed out too long with friends, he accused her of being unfaithful. If she smiled at a stranger, he would scold her for being too friendly. She learned to shrink herself, to keep her words measured and her actions careful, all in the hope of keeping the peace. Behind closed doors, she lived in fear of his anger, yet outside, they looked like the perfect couple. There were moments she thought of leaving, but each time, Kwame would find a way to pull her back. Sometimes he promised change, swearing he would be better. Other times he reminded her how much she needed him, how the world would laugh at her if she walked away. He made her believe that she was nothing without him, and for years, she clung to the hope that if she just endured, things might return to the love they once shared. But the slap at the anniversary dinner shattered that illusion. This time, the pain wasn't private. It was laid bare before family, friends, and colleagues. The shame on her face was nothing compared to the fire in her heart. As she sat there, pretending to laugh and eat, she made a quiet decision. This was the last time she would allow herself to be humiliated, the last time Kwame would strip away her dignity. Amara felt something awaken inside her, a strength she thought she had lost long ago. She realized she had been silent not because she was weak, but because she was patient. Now, patience was no longer enough. She knew she could not change Kwame, but she could change herself. She could take back her power. That night, though no one else could see it, Amara crossed an invisible line. She would no longer suffer quietly. Her silence would no longer be a cage, it would be her weapon. And from that moment, she began to plan her freedom. The night of the anniversary celebration carried on as if nothing had happened, at least on the surface. Amara sat with her back straight, her emerald dress still glowing under the soft lights, her face calm and unreadable. Guests kept stealing glances at her, waiting for her to break down or storm out, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled politely, lifted her glass when needed, and even laughed at jokes, though her laughter sounded faint, almost rehearsed. To everyone in the room, it seemed as if she had brushed off the slap, but inside her heart was a different story. Amara's mind was racing, but not with tears or panic. It was with thoughts sharp and clear, like pieces of a puzzle coming together. She had learned over the years that fighting Kwame head-on never worked. He was too loud, too arrogant, too quick to twist the truth. If she shouted or cried, he would only make her feel smaller. But tonight, as he boasted and raised his glass, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would not fight him openly, she would outsmart him. Every time Kwame laughed or made a careless remark, she studied him carefully. She noticed how he bragged about his business, how he puffed his chest when talking about his wealth, how he mocked her in small ways to get a laugh from her. He thought he was untouchable. That arrogance, she realized, would be his weakness. She didn't need to argue with him. She just needed to wait, watch, and prepare. So Amara played her part. She poured him wine when his glass was empty. She thanked guests for coming. She walked across the hall gracefully, as though the sting on her cheek was just a shadow. No one could guess that behind her calm eyes, she was already writing the first lines of a new chapter. This was not a woman broken. This was a woman building a plan. She knew it would take time. She couldn't rush. Kwame was powerful in many ways, but he was also careless, too sure of himself. He underestimated her, just as he always had. That would be her advantage. In her silence, she began to gather strength. In her composure, she began to build a strategy. When the guests finally left and the hall grew quiet, Kwame leaned back, satisfied, as if the night had been a success. He didn't notice the shift in her eyes, the stillness that was no longer fear but focus. Amara had mastered the art of hiding her true feeling, and now she would use it to her benefit. That night marked the beginning of something new. Amara's revenge would not come with shouting or public outbursts. It would be quiet, patient, and precise. And when it came, it would not just hurt, it would destroy. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of power stirring inside her, and it gave her a strange kind of peace. The storm was no longer inside her. She was becoming the storm. Amara knew that if she was going to bring Kwame down, she couldn't do it with emotions alone. She needed facts, proof, and a plan that left no room for mistakes. So, she began quietly gathering pieces of his life, the ones he thought she would never find. While Kwame carried himself like a king, bragging about his wealth and his connections, Amara moved like a shadow, taking note of everything he overlooked. At first, it started small. She went through drawers when he wasn't home, finding bank statements tucked away in envelopes. She copied them carefully, hiding the evidence in a safe place he would never think to check. She opened old files on his laptop late at night, memorizing passwords he thought she didn't know. Each click, each discovery gave her a new kind of strength. Kwame had always believed she was too weak to challenge him. But what he didn't realize was that years of silence had taught her patience, and patience was power. Soon she uncovered more. Property documents in his name and in the names of people connected to him. Receipts for large sums of money moved quietly across account. And then came the most painful discovery, proof of his affairs in Kumasi. Messages, hotel bills, photos. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was careless, arrogant enough to think his secrets would stay hidden forever. Amara collected everything, not with anger, but with precision. She knew she couldn't do it alone, so she reached out to her childhood friend Efua, a lawyer who had always been like a sister to her. Efua listened carefully as Amara laid out her findings, and for the first time in years, Amara spoke openly about the life she had endured. Efua didn't judge. Instead, she guided her step by step, showing her how to build a case so strong that Kwame would have no escape. "Don't rush," Efua told her. "The law works slowly, but once it catches you, it doesn't let go. Collect everything. Make it airtight." Amara followed every word. She documented dates, organized papers, and built folders of evidence. Every night, when Kwame slept, she worked quietly by the dim light of her phone. Every morning, she smiled as if nothing was wrong. No one could suspect that behind her calm demeanor, she was building a trap that would one day close in on him. The beauty of it was that Kwame never noticed. He was too busy flaunting his wealth, too busy chasing women, too busy thinking Amara was still the silent wife who would endure anything. He didn't see the shift, didn't sense the danger right in front of him. For Amara, this secret mission became more than revenge. It became her lifeline. Each paper she copied, each file she secured, was another brick in the wall of her freedom. She wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to strip him of the power he had used to control her for years. And the sweetest part? He would never see it coming until it was too late. Kwame had always been proud, but after the anniversary dinner, his arrogance seemed to grow even bigger. He walked around like a man who could never be touched, as if the slap in front of everyone had only made him stronger. He told friends how he kept his wife in line, laughing loudly as if her humiliation was a story to brag about. Each time he said it, people chuckled nervously, some agreeing just to stay on his good side. Kwame took their silence as admiration. He thought he was untouchable. Amara stayed quiet through it all. She never corrected him, never showed anger, never even let her face betray her true feeling. She nodded when he called her lucky. She smiled faintly when he joked about how other women wished they had a husband like him. Inside, she felt the fire burning hotter, but she controlled it. She had learned long ago that when a man like Kwame talks too much, it is better to let him. The louder he bragged, the harder he would fall. Every gathering became a stage for Kwame. He boasted about his money, his properties, his travels, his women in Kumasi. He mocked Amara in small, sharp ways that cut deep, but she never flinched. Instead, she listened, storing every word like ammunition. She watched how he exposed himself without realizing it, how his pride left cracks in the wall he thought was unbreakable. And in those moments, Amara understood the importance of timing. She could not rush her plan. Revenge was not about quick satisfaction. It was about precision. She needed to wait until his confidence was at its peak, until he was so high on his own pride that the fall would crush him completely. So she carried on like the dutiful wife. She poured him drinks at dinners, stood by his side at events, and greeted his friends warmly. Everyone believed she had accepted her place, that she was still the quiet, submissive woman. But behind that mask, she was watching the clock tick, waiting for the perfect second to strike. The memory of that slap at the anniversary still burned in her mind, but instead of pain, it gave her focus. It had become the spark that lit the fire of her plan. She replayed the moment often, not to feel weak, but to remind herself why she could never allow it to happen again. That night had stripped away her last bit of doubt. Kwame, blind in his arrogance, didn't see it coming. He laughed too loudly, mocked too freely, and flaunted too much. And Amara, patient and composed, let him believe he had won. What he didn't know was that every day he bragged, he was climbing higher on a ladder that she was slowly sawing off at the base. When the fall came, it wouldn't just hurt, it would leave nothing standing. The family gathering was supposed to be another chance for Kwame to show off. He walked into the room with his usual swagger, greeting relatives with loud laughter, and boasting about a new deal he had closed. He looked at Amara the way he always did, like she was just a decoration at his side. To everyone else, it seemed like another ordinary evening of food, music, and chatter. But Amara had been waiting for this day, and her calm smile carried a secret that no one else knew. When the time felt right, she stood up slowly, her voice steady as she asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted. Kwame leaned back, smirking, thinking she was about to thank him or say something sweet. Instead, she opened a folder she had been carrying, her hands smooth and deliberate. "Tonight," she began softly, "I think it's time we talk about the truth." She laid the first set of papers on the table, bank statements showing large amounts of money siphoned into hidden accounts. Murmurs spread around the room as relatives leaned in to see. Amara's voice didn't shake. She explained how Kwame had been draining money from joint accounts, moving funds secretly, and how she had tracked every transaction. Then came the property documents, signed, sealed, and now legally transferred into her name. Gasps erupted. Kwame's proud empire, The very thing he bragged about daily was no longer his. Kwame's smirk began to fade, his hands tightening on the arms of his chair. "What is this nonsense?" he barked, trying to laugh it off. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. Amara didn't flinch. She pulled out the final set of evidence: photographs, receipts, and messages proving his affairs with women in Kumasi. The room went still. No one could look away. Cousins whispered, aunts covered their mouths, and uncles shook their heads in disbelief. For years they had admired Kwame's charm, but now they saw him clearly. Kwame's face turned pale. His usual boldness was gone, replaced by silence. He looked around the room, searching for support, but found only stares of disappointment and disgust. Even the relatives who once laughed at his jokes couldn't defend him now. The same people who had seen him slap Amara weeks earlier were now watching his downfall unfold in front of their eyes. Amara stood tall, her expression calm, almost serene. She didn't shout, she didn't gloat. She simply presented the truth, one piece at a time, until Kwame was stripped bare of all the power he once held over her. By the time she closed the folder, there was nothing left for him to say. The silence that followed was heavy, but this time it wasn't hers to carry, it was his. Everyone in the room now knew the truth. Kwame's empire had crumbled, not with a fight, but with quiet precision. And Amara, the woman he thought would always be silent, had just turned the tables in front of them all. Kwame had always believed he was untouchable. For years he walked with pride, surrounded by respect and fear. But after Amara's reveal, his world began to collapse piece by piece. And this time, there was no way to laugh it off. The first blow came with the court summons. A neatly folded envelope arrived at his office, carrying the weight of Amara's evidence. Fraud, infidelity, mismanagement. Everything was laid out in black and white. Kwame tore through the papers, his hands shaking, his anger boiling over. He called his lawyer immediately, but the lawyer only sighed and said the case was airtight. Amara had prepared too well. Soon after, his bank accounts were frozen. The money he flaunted so easily, the wealth he used to buy loyalty and silence, was suddenly out of reach. Creditors began to call, workers demanded salaries, and deals fell apart. Business partners who once praised him started to distance themselves. They didn't want to be tied to a sinking ship. Contracts were canceled, promises withdrawn. The empire Kwame bragged about at every gathering now stood on shaky ground. As the news spread, whispers followed him everywhere. At first, people spoke in hushed tones, but soon it became open gossip. The same friends who once laughed with him now mocked him behind his back. Relatives who clapped at his arrogance now scolded him, calling him a disgrace to the family name. He tried to shout back, tried to insist he was still in control, but the louder he spoke, the clearer it became. No one believed him anymore. Everywhere he turned, doors closed. His business associates avoided his calls. The women he flaunted in Kumasi disappeared without a trace. Even his closest friends, the ones who cheered when he humiliated Amara, stopped coming around. He was alone, stripped of the pride and power that once defined him. Meanwhile, Amara stayed silent. She didn't need to argue or fight. The courts, the documents, and the whispers in the community did the work for her. Kwame's downfall was public, messy, and impossible to hide. Each headline, each rumor, chipped away at the image he had built. Kwame tried desperately to regain control. He stormed into offices, begging for meetings. He shouted at relatives, demanding respect. But the more he fought, the more pitiful he appeared. The mighty man who once slapped his wife in front of everyone was now the one people pitted, the one they whispered about in markets and offices. "Have you heard? Kwame has lost everything." It was a slow unraveling, but it was complete. His empire was gone, his name stained, his pride broken. And the cruelest part? It wasn't by loud confrontation or violent revenge. It was by silence, strategy, and truth, Amara's weapon. Kwame, the man who thought no one could bring him down, had finally fallen, and this time, there was no getting back up. When the dust finally settled, Amara stood tall, not as the broken wife people once pitted, but as a woman who had taken back her power. She didn't walk around bragging or shouting about her victory. She didn't need to. The silence that once trapped her had now become her crown. Everywhere she went, people looked at her with new eyes, not as Kwame's wife, but as Amara, the woman who outsmarted him and refused to be crushed. What amazed everyone was her composure. She never gloated, never rubbed Kwame's downfall in his face. Even when relatives tried to push her into boasting, she only smiled softly and said, "The truth always speaks for itself." That calm dignity made her victory even louder than any words could. People respected her not just for what she had done, but for how she had done it. Friends who once doubted her now rallied around. They brought her gifts, visited her, and praised her courage. Relatives who once turned a blind eye to Kwame's cruelty now apologized. admitting they had underestimated. Women in her community whispered her name with admiration, telling her story like a legend, how Amara endured, how she planned, and how she rose without shouting. Amara herself felt lighter than she had in years. For so long, she had lived in the shadows, carefully managing every word, every step, every smile to avoid Kwame's anger. Now she no longer needed to hide. She could laugh freely, speak boldly, and move without fear. It wasn't just about defeating Kwame. It was about reclaiming her freedom, her dignity, and her life. Even in private, she carried herself with grace. She didn't spend her nights plotting more revenge or celebrating his ruin. Instead, she focused on building something new, something truly hers. She invested time with people who genuinely cared for her, leaned on Efua's friendship, and allowed herself to dream again. For the first time in years, her reflection in the mirror didn't look like a stranger. It looked like herself. Kwame's name had become a cautionary tale, but Amara's name had become a symbol of strength. Her victory was not built on anger, but on intelligence, patience, and quiet execution. And that, more than anything else, earned her respect. As she looked back on her journey, Amara realized something powerful. She had not just survived, she had transformed. The pain, the humiliation, the years of silence had all shaped her into a woman stronger than she ever imagined. She didn't need to scream her triumph. The world already knew. And so, with her head held high and her heart finally free, Amara stepped out of the shadow of abuse and into the light of her own dignity. Her story was no longer one of suffering, it was one of triumph. The waves crashed gently against the shore as Amara stood on the balcony of her new home in Cape Coast. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, calm and steady, just like the peace she now carried inside. The house was bright and open, filled with sunlight that poured through wide windows. It was hers, bought with her own name, her own freedom, and her own strength. She walked through the rooms slowly, letting her fingers trail across the walls. Each step reminded her of the journey that had brought her here. The nights of silent tears, the years of enduring insults, the sting of that slap in front of everyone. It all seemed so far away now. What once broke her had become the very fuel that rebuilt her. Amara didn't see her revenge as cruelty. To her, it was justice, carefully planned and executed with patience. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or match Kwame's violence. Instead, she had used silence, intelligence, and timing. That was what made it unforgettable. The people who had once pitted her now spoke her name with respect, some even with awe. They knew she could never again be underestimated. Standing on the balcony, watching the horizon glow with the colors of sunset, Amara allowed herself to smile. Not the polite smile she wore at parties, but a real one, full of relief and hope. This was her new beginning. No more shadows, no more fear. Just peace, freedom, and the promise of a future she would shape on her own terms. Her story had begun with pain, but it ended with power. And as the waves whispered against the shore, Amara knew she had finally come home, to herself.